Hi there, and welcome to drawingandpaintingforeveryone.com. Today I'm going to show you the observations you need to create the illusion of volume. To explain what I mean by the word volume, let's look at this vase. Your eyes and brain use visual clues, light and shadow, to help you recognize and even imagine the feel of this vase. The word volume describes this object's three-dimensional form. We're going to examine how light works on four basic shapes: a sphere, a cylinder, a cone, and a cube. The hope is that by looking at light on these shapes, we'll be able to model anything we look at. But before we get started with that, I want to make one quick observation. This simple illustration produces an interesting illusion. It appears that the center shape pushes into the image while the surrounding shapes push out. The computer screen that you're currently looking at is flat. Still, the illusion persists. But when I flip the image over, the illusion changes. Now the center shape appears to push out, while the surrounding shapes push in. This tells us two important things about our vision. First, it tells us that light and shadow helps us see depth. Second, it tells us that we have a built-in assumption that the light source is overhead. This image suggests that if we learn to look closely and mimic what we see, we can create in our drawings and paintings the illusion of depth and volume. If you're new to the art term business, the word value simply describes lightness and darkness. A light value is near white and a dark value is near black. The camera uses roughly 100 values of gray to represent a black and white image. To help us make sense of all this information, we've created a technique which divides all those gray values into 5 basic regions. Collectively, these 5 regions are grouped into what is known as the 5-value system. We'll start our discussion with this image of a sphere. If you look closely at the light surface of the sphere, you'll notice a bright spot. This spot is referred to as the highlight. Next, we have the local value. This is the region between the highlight and the shadow. From there, we transition to the ridge shadow. In this image, the ridge shadow is difficult to distinguish, but if I put a different surface under the sphere, the ridge shadow becomes noticeable. It's this dark ridge around the sphere. Next, light bouncing off this new lighter surface reflects onto the underside of the sphere. Naturally, we call this reflected light. Finally, we have the cast shadow. These 5 regions provide clues to my eyes and ultimately to my brain that creates the illusion of volume. Now let's examine those same 5 values on our cylinder. Again, we have the highlight, but notice that it's a line rather than a dot. The local value is on either side of that line. As with the sphere, the ridge shadow and the reflected light are difficult to see. But once I place a more reflective surface under the cylinder, the ridge shadow is obvious. Reflected light, and finally cast shadow. The next basic shape is a cone. The highlight goes down the length of the cone and compresses towards the point. As with the cylinder, the local value is on either side of this highlight. And like our other basic shapes, the ridge shadow and the reflected light regions are difficult to see until I add a different reflective surface. So now we have the ridge shadow, reflected light, and cast shadow. The final basic shape is a cube. This shape isn't technically a cube because it doesn't have equal sides, but it'll still work for my demonstration. The highlight here is on the complete top surface. If, however, the light source were lower, say at sunrise or sunset, the side of the shape would be brighter than the top, and the highlight would shift to that side. For this example, the highlight is on the top. The right side is the local value. Again, I'm going to place a lighter surface down here so that you can see the ridge shadow. It's hard to see. It's this thin line that goes around the very edge of the cube. That's the ridge shadow. This whole front surface is reflected light. And finally, the cast shadow. That's the 5-value system projected onto the 4 basic shapes. Though this sculpture is more complicated than the basic shapes we've been looking at, with a little effort, I can convert each portion of the sculpture back into one of my basic shapes. First, I'll point out some of the highlights. The forehead is similar to a sphere. I also see highlights on each of the brows. The bridge of the nose has the shape of a cylinder, and the highlight here looks like the highlight on a cylinder. Also, the tip of the nose is spherical, and the highlight looks like the highlight on a sphere. There are also highlights on each eyelid, and highlights on the mouth and chin. The rest of the information on the light side of this image is considered local value. As we roll into shadow, we encounter the ridge shadow. To help you see the reflected light more clearly, I'm using a red sheet of paper to reflect red light back into the shadow side of the face. And finally, we have the cast shadow. Even with this sculpture, the 5-value system dictates the illusion of volume. I can't stress enough how important it is to understand how light works on these 4 basic shapes. Creating the illusion of realism in your drawings or your paintings requires this information. Good luck. I hope this has been helpful.